After months of telling us not so subtly that he did not necessarily want to be a Phoenix Sun anymore, Jae Crowder reportedly on the trading block by way of the Phoenix Suns. On today's show, we'll talk about the parameters for a Crowder trade, options for trade partners with Jae Crowder, and what might happen now if there's not a deal between the team and their starting power forward. Locked on Suns, let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday. Honestly, really excited. Back to 5 days a week, back to daily. I'm giving it to you 1 week early. The network will not be going daily until next week, but I was excited. I'm antsy. I'm really craving NBA basketball again. The WNBA finals are done. I'm really excited for this Sun season, even if it might be a little crazy, as we will talk about today. So if you're excited to hit subscribe, hit follow, whatever podcast platform you're on, we're there. YouTube, we're there. And all you have to do to support the show is listen to it, watch it, consume it, and follow along with it. If you need to do so on social, if you want to do so on social, hit follow at Locked On PHX Suns over on Twitter and keep up that way as well. Brian Windhorst today on NBA Today reporting that, let me get the exact wording correct here, that Jae Crowder is available and that the Suns have been, quote, very active in searching for trades for him. He was being asked primarily about the Suns' willingness to continue to spend money, so that will factor into the trade targets that I'm going to talk about, because Windy did also say in that same segment on the show that he could see the Suns adding salary, that they're not afraid, that other teams at least don't expect them to restrain themselves from adding salary. We know that for every dollar of salary, that's an X amount of tax money too. So it's not just as simple as paying players or not. This is a tax implication. We know the team has a backup owner at this point, and they seem to be okay with that. So I want to lay out the parameters of what I think sort of the rules of engagement might be for a trade with you guys. And then after that, I want to go through some targets. So I have 1-for-1 deals, sort of identical value guys, big trades. And I have I have one bigger trade, and then I have 2, what did I call them? Like home run swings? That's what I have, home run swings. So we'll get to those in a second, but the parameters here, okay? What are the rules the Suns are going to be operating under from their side, from who they might want to deal with, et cetera? So number 1, I don't think under any circumstances the Suns will do a trade that makes them worse this season, okay? So this is not dumping Jae Crowder. This is not trading Crowder for some sort of young project player. That's not how James Jones does business. And it also would just be kind of stupid, right? The Suns are firmly in the championship mix once again this year, assuming they look like themselves. And getting worse is just not an option. Number 2, the Suns will probably not do a trade, I think, that costs them a first-round pick, unless it is one of those home runs, right? If it's something, obviously they would have given up several first-round picks for Kevin Durant. We talked on Monday's show, which you should check out, about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That would cost them multiple first-round picks, we would assume. Those trades, of course, you give up a first. But a straight Crowder trade where you're just finding a trade partner, where Crowder goes to one team, the Suns get back something else, maybe there's some smaller stuff in there as well. That's not something I would see the Suns wanting to include a first-round pick in. I just don't think it's worth upgrading a little bit from Crowder to somebody else if it costs you a pick and if it costs you the ability to go out and make a big trade in the future. That's the biggest part. You need to keep the powder dry for a star trade down the line, because we know the Suns are gearing up to make one of those eventually. Number 3 in the parameters, Suns are unlikely to trade Crowder to another contender, in my opinion. Okay, so what I mean by that is I was poking around what the bloggers are writing about, or whatever you want to say. NBA people seem to think, oh, well, the Boston Celtics, well, they could use Crowder. Well, sure. The Miami Heat, they could use Crowder. Okay, maybe we're getting a little warmer there. Still don't fully think so. I've talked about the Duncan Robinson option for a long time. That feels like that ship might have sailed. Who knows? Overall, unless it's something that fulfills maybe the first two, where the Suns are getting better this season and they're not giving up a first-round pick, unless it's checking both of those boxes, I just don't think it's very likely at all that the Suns trade the Crowder to another championship contender, especially in the West. Yes, Crowder would fit on all of those teams because he's a very, very valuable championship caliber role player. But congratulations. The Suns already have him, unless they're getting a better version of him or a different type of role player, high-level role player. I don't know why they would want to make their competitors better, okay? So let's get into targets. I want to say anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's guess when it comes to James Jones trades. We know that, right? Like, we know this guy operates in silence. The fact that the Crowder news even got out is indicative of the fact that this is probably pretty serious, which is why I'm devoting a whole show to it. But as far as who they could go after, who they've already talked to, I would not expect to hear much about it. And it will probably be somebody we are not expecting. But we're a long way into the offseason. I mean, we're 2 weeks from training camp, right? So like, I don't think the canvas is just like completely open. I don't think it can be any old player around the whole entire NBA. I think most good to great teams are pretty locked into their rosters, which fits because, again, I don't think the Suns would want to be dealing him to another contender. So you're sort of looking at like the average to below average to tanking teams who have some extra veteran role players where maybe they're a little bit of a better fit for what the Suns want to be in 2023 than what Crowder is. Maybe they're pretty equivalent players, but Crowder is just disgruntled now, so you want to move on. Something like that is where I started. So I have like almost 10 names here. And let's start with the 1-for-1 guys. Basically the players who are equal in value to Jae Crowder or right about equal. Number one is somebody that I've talked about for, forever. I would say since Monty Williams became the coach, if not longer. I have thought Alec Burks is somebody the Suns who just makes a lot of sense. I think he's a good player for any team because he can play some pretty solid defense. He's big, he's versatile, he can shoot, and he can create for himself. He's improved as a passer as he's gotten older. He's coming off of surgery, which would be the one downside, but he was one of the guys that the Knicks dumped to the Pistons on draft night. And the Pistons are probably going to be fairly competitive this year, but do they need a 30-year-old role player like Burks? Probably not. They probably don't need Crowder either, but they might, if they could get a couple second-round picks, something like that, they might do that trade. Buddy Hield, let's move quickly through these. Buddy Hield, I think people know, he's been connected to the Lakers quite a bit. Just a shooter. I think he's really a big liability defensively in the playoffs. He doesn't really create a lot for himself. He's gotten better as an interior shooter and a guy who moves without the ball and all those things over time, based on what I've read and seen, but not a huge impact player for you based on what the Suns need, right? Will Barton, I don't know what the Wizards want to be, but he's a veteran on a team that last year was not competitive. So you could easily see him changing teams. I think he's more of an off-ball player, not as good of a defender as he maybe was a few years ago. He's dealt with injuries. He's older, but somebody who, different type of guy than Crowder, can score in a little bit of a better variety of ways, but you're probably losing a little bit defensively. He's not really a 4. He's more of a wing, but that's an option. Terry Rozier from the Hornets. We talked about him a lot with the Ayton trade because the Hornets might have been interested. We thought in Ayton, turns out not so much, but he is a one-position defender, but a pretty solid point guard defender, depending on the matchup, and somebody who can knock down threes, handle the ball a little bit. 3-and-D guard, basically. Bojan Bogdanovic and Jordan Clarkson, both from the Jazz, were the last two on the 1-for-1 option. So I don't really love the Bojan Bogdanovic thing. I feel like he is a worse Cam Johnson is an easy way to think of him. He's really only a shooter at this point in his career. He's a very good one at that, but Is he really going to even be playing for you in the playoffs? I don't think so. I think Crowder is significantly better than Bogdanovic on a playoff team, significantly more valuable overall player than Bogdanovic for a team with championship aspirations. Clarkson I really like. I've actually liked it less over time, and I don't have a great answer for why. I think Clarkson is an underrated defender. I think he's somebody that can at least stay on the floor in the playoffs. I think he can create his own shot. I think I just worry about if he can hold up in Monty Williams' system, or if he's somebody who would just butt heads because he's going to chuck shots, right? That's what he's done his whole career. But is Monty willing to stomach a player like that? I'm not so sure. So my favorite of these is Terry Rozier. I think overall, he's somebody who you could imagine chasing Steph Curry in playoff series. You could imagine him chasing Jamal Murray in playoff series. You could imagine him guarding Reggie Jackson of the Clippers. You could imagine him playing that type of defense, knocking down shots, being a backup guard who can come in and create some offense for you off the bench, and is a proven playoff player. I think the problem with him is the contract is really, really big. It's just now kicking in, the extension that he had signed a while back. So he's making a ton of money. It would have to be more than Crowder. It would be like Crowder, Saric, and Torrey Craig. And that would probably help the Hornets because all three of those players are expiring contracts. But is it somebody who is worth doing that? Worth clearing 3 rotation players out for one guy? Like it's a hard trade to make it work is the one downside. But overall, as a player, I think he's gettable. And I do think he would be a pretty solid addition for the Suns. But that's just the one for ones. There's 3 names. One is what I called a bigger deal. The other 2 are the home run swings that I do want to get to here, guys. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source all year long. No matter the sport, no matter the day of the week, no matter the time of the year, they have everything. They already have week 3 pro football odds here. No Cardinals odds. They're cowering in their boots. They're afraid to put odds down on the Cardinals because of the comeback. I get it. It's okay. I understand. Packers Bucks is the big one next weekend. The Bucks are currently 2-point favorites. The over-under on that one is 41.5. That feels pretty tasty. I know neither offense has looked incredible the past 2 weeks, but both of those teams scored 20 plus this week against pretty good defenses. So you could easily see that game going over 41.5. That's what you can find on BetOnline. Odds, as well as analysis, news, and info that you need to make picks and more. So head to their website or their mobile app and learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. The bigger trade won't surprise anybody. Any Suns fans who have been reading the tea leaves, has heard of this option. Harrison Barnes. Okay, so I think this is now year 3 consecutively. It's similar to my infatuation with Alec Burks is Harrison Barnes. Suns fans being really excited about the potential of adding Harrison Barnes to their team, to this team. I think let me start here. Obviously, it makes sense, right? I think defensively, he's about as close of a Crowder replacement as you're going to get. Let me put it that way, right? So I think that's really exciting. I think he actually is a little more versatile than Crowder, even on defense, right? Like, I think, Crowder can guard like the LeBron, like you mostly want him, like, who's the best person for him to defend? Like, I mean, it's the fact that he's strong, right? And so I think you're getting that with Harrison Barnes, but I also think Barnes is a little bit quicker, a little more agile. You've seen him switch a little bit more. Now, he's also on the older side, but you could imagine the Suns switching more on defense with him, which I think is going to be really important to try to do more going forward with this group. And offensively, of course, he's more versatile. He's somebody who can create his own shot. He's somebody who can post up. He's somebody who can make threes just like Crowder does. The problem is, I think the Kings probably need some type of future asset on top of Crowder. It can't just be Crowder and Saric or Crowder and Craig because Barnes is also an expiring contract. So it's not as easy as saying, well, 1 for 1 or, Crowder plus Craig and, that saving money thing doesn't really matter. They would save a little bit of money this year, but that's not that important. They're not a tax team or anything like that. So, do they like Landry Shamet? Would they take multiple second round picks instead of a first? I think that's where the negotiations will go. Personally, I do not feel, I don't think definitely not an unprotected first. I would think a heavily protected first that turns into future seconds if it doesn't convey in the near term is probably where I'd go. I know that feels very in the weeds, but that's where this stuff goes. Like, can you get a top 20 protected first round pick that then becomes a couple of second round picks by, let's say, like 2025? Something like that, because I don't think you want to do lottery protected, because maybe you have 1 year when Chris Paul's not here, if you haven't found the replacement yet, that things go haywire. Like, you just can't risk not having a pick. You also can't, for somebody that's, it's only Harrison Barnes. Like, he's not going to make or break your season. And then I also don't think you want to jeopardize too bad your ability to make trades for a star. And so I would maybe consider it with that protected first, but I would try like all get out to do it as Crowder and Shamet, or Crowder, Shamet, and a couple seconds. I think that would be good. It all depends on what the Kings want. I think from the Kings standpoint, they're still getting Jae Crowder. They might feel like, hey, we're not trying to win a championship. That's perfectly good for us. If you want to give us a little more and get Barnes, go for it. And I will say on the Kings side, they are apparently willing to trade him for the first time in a while, for the first time ever. So maybe that jars things loose a little bit, and they are more accepting of a smaller offer. I don't know. He is expiring. They're not going to get a ton for him. A first would be a lot, but I also don't know what else the Suns really have. Home run swings. The moment you've all been waiting for. So one, Markelle Fultz. All right. I didn't do a drum roll, but I think that's a pretty big name. Definitely haven't seen a lot of other people bring that one up. This one, I think to me, if you paid attention to how the type of player that Markelle Fultz has become, it shouldn't surprise you. Like, I think he's really turned into a solid two-way player. Now, does he still have a ways to go? Yeah, but in terms of chiseling out his offensive game especially. But the shooting stuff, at least from 2-point range, the yips and whatever else is not there anymore, not bothering him. He's always been a heck of a defender. He's a pretty solid pick-and-roll playmaker. And he would be the back. I think he's somebody who would be fine in a backup role this year. He's already on a team with a backlog of guards. Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony. They also have some bigger players who need the ball, Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, not to mention Wendell Carter. Like, they have a lot of guys who are best with getting some chances with the ball in their hands, not to mention multiple point guards. So he's already had to deal with that. That's also a reason you could see him becoming available. And I think you could see him accepting a smaller role this year with the idea of becoming the point guard of the future. And then lastly, Monty coached Markelle Fultz the one season that Monty Williams was in Philly. So I think from that standpoint, it's pretty appealing as a Suns rehabilitation and development opportunity. And he's not making a ton of money. You could get it done with like Crowder and Craig as the salaries. This is one where you're going to probably have to put a first round pick in there just because the Suns don't have young players. If you had a blue chip prospect, maybe you don't have to give up the first, but you give up the player instead. I don't think Cam Johnson, maybe Cam Johnson, but are you giving up Crowder and Johnson? Then you don't really have any power forwards left on your roster. So it's looking like it would have to be a first to me. And then the funny thing here, I have to bring it up. There's few players in the entire NBA who shoot more of their percentage of shots from mid-range than Booker or Paul. Markelle Fultz is one of them. He took almost 60% of his total shots last year from mid-range, 57% of them. He was in the 100th percentile, and he doesn't make them a whole ton. So it's still a work in progress. He's great at the rim, great defender, but I think that would be worth doing if it could be something relatively small on the player side. If you could do it for Crowder, Shamet, and a first, I think something like that, I might be pretty intrigued. And I think it's not crazy to think he could be available. The last one is the biggest swing. I don't even know how much time I want to spend on it, but I think it's a name worth bringing up. Lonzo Ball. Okay, now hear me out. One, I don't know what Chicago's going to do long term. They swung big to get Vooch and DeRozan in there. They had a great season last year, but they don't have a ton of young talent. They might lose Kobe White. Who knows what that's going to look like next summer when he's a restricted free agent. And I don't know what their ceiling is, right? So on the Lonzo side, he's injury plagued. So I think from that standpoint, the Suns are gonna. It's a big risk, and it's a knee problem. He's already looking like he's gonna miss the beginning of this season. He missed most of the back half of last season, and he's always had injury problems. He has 3 years, like $60+ million left on his contract. So these things are limiting factors, but it also could be a thing that you get a little bit of a decreased cost to go get him. I think from an on-court standpoint, I mean, I've always loved him, right? Like all the way back to the Josh Jackson draft, we've all talked ad nauseum about Lonzo. He ends up going number 2. Suns don't have a chance to get him, but nice fit with Booker, good team defender. He's developed into an even better spot-up shooter than I think most of us expected he would be, so that makes him even better fit on any team. And then he would make the transition attack much better. I also think he could play in 3-guard lineups with Booker and CP. And then he's not so much of like a point guard of the future in the traditional sense, but I think next to Book, the two of them can split playmaking duties. I think it could work. Again, it's just a matter of what are you really going to give up for a player who's dealt with injuries so much, and are the Bulls willing to kind of cut bait on somebody like that? But if I'm the Suns, I'd at least call. And if you can get something worked out that's a little bit smaller and you don't have to give up a ton, I personally would be willing to stomach the injury risk, knowing that he's not going to have to start for you. He's not going to have to play a massive role. And maybe you can spend a year getting him back healthy. Okay, so what if there's no trade? What if there's no trade at all? We've talked about the 1-for-1s, the bigger, and the home run swings. Talked about the parameters of how the Suns might be thinking about this trade. But what if they don't get it done? Wendy, in that ESPN TV report today, very much indicated it's no sure thing, right? A lot of teams are not really open for business this close to training camp. They don't want to shuffle the deck. Who knows, right? But the Suns would have to answer a lot. I mean, they're going to have to move forward if they're the ones who waited this long to try to get the deal done. So they might have to deal with the consequences. What are those consequences? And can Crowder handle it like a pro? Talk about all of that on the other side. First, today's show brought to you by My Solar Nerd. Really excited to tell you about them. A new local sponsor on the show, guys. If you live in a sunny state like ours, it's very likely that you've had a few people stop by offering you, quote, free solar. The truth is, many of these companies aren't local, and because of that, they're using misleading tactics and end up overcharging homeowners just like you. If you've considered solar, but something felt a little off about the way it was getting thrown at you, you're going to love My Solar Nerd. Their mission is simple: help you get the best solar system to fit your needs. The guys at mysolarnerd.com are local and understand the nuances of going solar in Arizona. They've been doing this for a while, and they understand that an educated customer is a happy customer. Their no-pressure approach will make sure all of your questions get answered, and they firmly believe that if you live in Arizona, switching to solar should mean saving money. That's true. Once you're ready, they'll put their industry knowledge to work for you by choosing the best equipment warranties and BBB-accredited installer. They'll also help you figure out all the credits and incentives you may qualify for, and they'll make sure that your transition to solar is as smooth as possible by managing the entire project for you and keeping you updated along the way. Our listeners will get a $50 Amazon gift card when they book a no-commitment evaluation promotion for listeners that are homeowners. Remember, so you can't tell your apartment complex to put solar in as much as you might like to. Visit mysolarnerd.com and select Locked On if you are a homeowner in the How Do You Hear About Us section when you sign up. Make the switch to solar on your terms. Start your research process by visiting mysolarnerd.com today and show Locked On some love by letting them know that we sent you. Folks, going solar doesn't need to be complicated. MySolarNerd.com makes it easy. All right, we are back. What if the Suns don't make a Jae Crowder trade? Apparently, they're exploring one. We know Crowder wants one. But I think we need to zoom actually back a little bit further into the past to get where this all started before we really evaluate what might happen in the future, right? So the problems, in my opinion, started in the second round. Crowder, you could see on video that he waved off Chris Paul. And I don't even think it was that extreme. I mean, I definitely didn't read too much into it in the moment. It was in game one, so they won that game. They went on to win game two, of course, right? So it didn't feel like much, but maybe it was. It was seemingly about a blown defensive assignment. They were winning. It was the fourth quarter already. There was nothing really to be too mad about in seemingly, right? But Crowder sort of just brushed right past Chris, just didn't even look him in the eye, ignored what he was saying, and walked to the bench after a timeout was called. So maybe there was more than we thought, right? Maybe there was more to this. I think Crowder also, I could at least just sort of me, from my vantage point, could easily see that, I could see Crowder being frustrated that he was one of the only guys at the end of that series playing aggressively, right? Like, love it or hate it, he was taking shots, he was dribbling the ball, he was doing a lot offensively. And obviously, as a bystander or somebody who might have been rooting for the Suns offense to look better, it wasn't always pretty to see him doing that. But I could easily see it as somebody a guy, Crowder, who plays so confidently, values competitive spirit so highly that people not stepping up could really have brushed him the wrong way, right? I think it continued. Of course, if it started in the second round or somewhere in the playoffs, I think it likely continued with the Kevin Durant stuff. We always knew that Crowder was a decent chance to be part of that trade if it had happened. And then, of course, Suns logo on Instagram. There's liking posts on Twitter of him like photoshopped with other teams' jerseys on, like all this nonsense on social media. And then this year, now kind of fast forwarding, why might he, be interested in trade? And I'm not saying he demanded a trade, asked for a trade, but I don't think the Suns would be exploring this possibility if he was somebody who was perfectly happy, committed, etc. Right? We know he's on an expiring contract. He's 32. He might be looking to next summer and seeing sort of only one last good chance at a bigger, long contract, like JaVale McGee just got this summer. Although he's even older, we were all a little surprised. 3 years, $21 million for JaVale McGee, but Crowder's trying to cash in on that type of opportunity, right? So he might be looking over his shoulder at Cam as the future starter. He might not have loved how last season ended, the fact that he was almost traded. To if the trade had happened, I mean, imagine Crowder would have been on a Nets team with like Ben Simmons and nothing else. That's not a championship contender, right? So I could see some frustration about where he was headed and uncertainty with that way as he's entering a contract year. And then also, like, he still never won a championship, right? So I think it's fair to wonder if he might think, hey, this isn't the best chance to do that anymore. And if he can dictate his fate either to rebuilding team that would just buy him out, where he would then get to go choose his new team, or to another contender, which I've already said I'm skeptical of, but he might want that. You could see that, right? And so I kind of feel like this close to training camp, we already know Crowder was disgruntled. I don't think this would be even explored if it wasn't mutually agreed upon. So I do think Crowder is wanting this, maybe advocating for a trade, and now it's just on the Suns to find what's going to make the most sense. But all of that said, I still feel like Crowder will handle this as a pro, if he doesn't get traded, or if he just doesn't get traded yet, right? Like there's that potential too. I think there's a limit. I think it's like this upcoming weekend is the last time to make trades until the midpoint of the season, whatever that date is, when teams can make trades again. So with all of that said, I think he gets it, right? Like, he might want to trade. He might not love the KD stuff. He might not love his role on this team or the way that he's butting heads with people if that's happening. But he's also a professional, right? Like, he played the first half of the 2019-20 season with the Grizzlies. They weren't a great team yet. He got traded there. He didn't play awesome, but he made the most of it. He'd sit on the bench. He didn't go home. He's been on a ton of teams at this point in his career. He gets the deal, right? And it's not like they're going to be a bad team. It's not like these are random strangers that he just ended up with. These are his teammates. So unless it's awful, I don't think going back to the status quo and just suiting up for a little while longer while they continue to pursue a potential trade is all that would be all that hard for him, would be all that frustrating for him. I feel like I just defer to his professionalism in that situation. But at the same time, I definitely would bet at this point, with such concrete reporting about his availability, that he's not on the roster come playoff time. So if it doesn't happen between now and that deadline in September, I definitely think it will happen prior to the trade deadline in 2023. It probably makes sense for the Suns to do that, capitalize on the expiring contract if you can, get somebody who can do a little more for you offensively potentially, and do right by a guy who's committed to you and has handled things well so far, right? So I just think it feels like this is a mutual parting of ways that we're kind of seeing right now, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I do think it's likely to happen, whether it's part of a big deal like Shea or KD or even Lonzo Ball, like I brought up, or something smaller, and they get back Terry Rozier, or they get back Jordan Clarkson. I think any of those are in the ballpark, and I do think a trade is pretty likely at some point this season. Could even be this week. So keep it right here. Hit subscribe, hit follow, whatever podcast platform you're on, whatever YouTube account you're logged into. Make sure, if you have multiple YouTube accounts, subscribe on all of them. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It helps me either way, and you can watch multiple times on different accounts for all that I know. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. In the meantime, go make Locked On NBA your second listen here on this Tuesday to catch up on everything else going on around the league.